Today I have a special guest with me. I think all my guests is always special. I know I've been saying that, but I have known this person for a while now, and to me, working with her in the past has kind of opened up my eyes to things that I have not been aware of. Today I have Ariel with me, and I'm gonna let Ariel uh, give some background. Kind of introduce herself. Let's do that.
All right, so I'm Ariel. Sometimes I go by Ariel, both work. So a little bit about myself. Hobby-wise, I used to be a hobby podcaster. I train in the martial arts. In the professional space, I am a professional user experience designer. I have done it full spectrum from usability testing, survey, copywriting, content strategy, and UI design, information architecture, information design, and now I run a small team. And it, it's been a wild ride.
Awesome.
It's
So
been a wild ride.
So, if folks that are listening and watching this, if you haven't guessed it yet, the reason why I wanted to get Ariel here is to learn about UX. So, it's one of the things as for me, growing up in the technology space, I would say I call myself old because my past is kind of very old. I would say that, right? Uh, I grew up in terms of, started with DOS, right? There's this plain black screen, and then
Yes,
you
that's
know
right.
then there comes Windows, and here comes this nice UI thing, right?
Yeah.
User interface. And all people talk about when we say user experience was it, what is that? Oh, you mean it's just a UI? So people
Uh,
talk about all the time, right?
yeah.
So that's a misconception that I have, right? Even from a technology space. But in the past, I've learned quite a few things about it. So the intention for this call with you, for this conversation here, is to learn about, one, what is UX, right? And then two, possibly, for somebody that has zero experience in UX, how does one get into this, what I consider a very cool space in career wise?
It is. It is. It's so much fun. It's asking what is the end goal of the business and what is the end goal of the user when
Okay.
they're using this product. Now, most of the time, we know what the end goal of the business is.
Mm-hmm.
And we put something out there. The intent is to help somebody. And so we're doing our best to do that. And we've pulled in information from expert sources. We've gone out to research papers. We've looked at white papers. We've done all of our research. But what didn't take place was this physical watching everybody use it and to see it if they use it the way that you intended. And that along with a lot of other little pieces like research in the iconography space and how subtle changes on the microscopic level can actually have a visible and noticeable emotional change in people's ability to focus. And so that's where psychology comes in, and a whole lot of different pieces of business that didn't have this landing place suddenly started to culminate together. And so whenever you do the field testing or you do look in to find out why are people not continuing to buy this
Mm-hmm.
product, even just doing data analysis and all of these kind of fall into this one little bucket, and that's end user uh, research. And that is kind of the birthplace of and where UX is today. So
So one thing that as you're talking about it, is that UX is not UI, right?
right.
And UX, the sound to me is more than UI itself, right? So there's a misconception, especially me, right, being an old guy here, is that we always think about UX, at least I did, was, oh, it's just the user interface of a software,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it really is not,
it's
right?
that's just the end result if you can't solve it in another way. A lot of
So,
times you want to have the least amount
mhm.
of interaction points possible. And so when you're trying to think about what is this trying to solve for the end user, it doesn't mean that it's just in technology. It's
Okay,
also your vacuum cleaner or the direction, like the plate on the door
right.
versus the handle.
Yes, yes, and that's the Norman doors, and that comes to
Yeah.
mind, right? That's something that in my head is like, there are this guy named Norman that did some research, and you talk about doors, how doors are designed, where some doors, when you're supposed to be pushing it, but there's a handle there. And by nature, when
Yeah,
we see a
you want to
handle, we
pull it.
tend to pull, right?
That's right.
So
That's
it's like,
right.
it's interesting that people do this research, and that's user experience. My guess
Yeah.
would be that's what it is, right?
It's one of the UX disciplines. Yes.
Okay. So I've been noticing something that is that I've seen people call themselves UX, and then I've seen these terms now called CX. What is CX?
User experience design is about the bottom of the funnel. So I'll go in business terms. You have top of the funnel and the bottom of the funnel. You have and somebody just knowing you maybe exist, or they're even going, hey, I'm looking for a solution, and eventually they get into a buying cycle, right? And that is part of the user experience. It absolutely is, but that is a subset of that's a customer experience. But that has more to do with thinking in terms of operations. And
Okay.
so, if, for instance, I'm working in I'm hearing all of this feedback. I see it in the service desk logs, but there's no tagging or
Okay.
categorizing involved. It's very difficult for somebody like myself or product management to be able to very quickly get insights about what our end users are calling in about that they're struggling with.
Okay.
And so customer experience inside the company ends up being more a focus on how can we get that data that we're already collecting and make it so that the left hand can talk to the right more easily, because that's what's
Okay.
happening. Our customers are talking to us. Who are they talking to? Well, they're talking to, X, Y, and Z.
Okay.
And in every company, it's the same situation. It's the
Okay.
same situation. So it's sort of like an internal efficiency focus that sometimes ends up being, okay, here's a great idea. We don't have that specialty, but marketing
Okay.
does, or somebody that is working with sales does. And we just basically go, here's some insights that we gathered. Here, we're going to, this is not our job. This is not our thing. But I know that there's some great people who are fantastic at this and
Hmm.
this and this and this. And so it's really just kind of like an advisory role
Okay.
that some people actively do have as their full-time job.
Okay. So there's one thing that in our last conversation that you talked about that I do want to get to, which is the change friction, but I want to save that for last.
Okay.
I want to ask about how did you get into this space, right? And that's one. Then the
Okay.
two is how can somebody, with zero knowledge today, how can somebody get into that space, right? How do I become a UX engineer, for instance?
In this space, there are a lot of incredibly smart people. There are scholars. There are people who have dedicated their entire lives to research, and I have mad respect for them. I was a child in a situation, gosh, of low income. I'll put it that way. My mom worked two jobs. My dad was in the military overseas, and it was tight, and they weren't doing too hot. So I was a latchkey kid eventually. And for better or for worse, you could say that in a way, life taught me life. And because I was not big on TV, but the little I did, it was in some ways TV raised me in movies because it was entertainment, and that was the only social interaction I had, because as a latchkey kid in the areas that we lived, it was not safe. It was not
Okay.
safe, so fast forward in time, and I'm in high school, and bad situations, I need to get out. I enroll in a remote learning high school so I can continue to get my diploma, but I needed to be out and working and out from underneath my parents' house. And so I did that. And at the time, the path to college was completely blockaded. And I said, I don't care. I've got a really good mind. I think I want to use it. And so I would just find books. I'd go to the library and start to learn about different things and experiment. And I got into video gaming, and I realized recently I got into video gaming not for the games, but for the game mechanics, because they were so fascinating. And eventually that got boring, but I covered a lot of that, and I learned a ton. And eventually I found user experience design because I'm like, oh my gosh, I can meet up my psychology obsession with my technology and design background. It all melts together. And I had spent almost 10 years on the service desk, taking in phone calls, hearing customers, and meanwhile sending things going, hey, if we changed it in this way, it might help, or losing my voice left and right, and pulling out viruses and Trojans from the registry. And so I really got to know the operating system, and I started to pick up open source projects and met some really cool people that worked up on the top floor that rented out our company's top floor space. And they were the super neat agency and some of the neatest people I've ever talked to. And so I'm just like, oh my gosh, there's this thing I could do. So of course I went to my books and I read and I read and I read, and I decided to jump for it. I started my own business. I had a side hustle for a while, along with doing my podcasting and running that. And so I learned a lot through that. And eventually somebody gave me a chance. And it was for this really fast-paced company. Everybody brought their all. Like, the company was very good at providing the actual definition of focus, like that thing where your brain is able to get into that focus state. And they knew how to promote that out of each one of their employees. And so we were just doing incredible work for really big names. And you everybody brought, when you're in an environment where everybody's bringing their all, you are just compelled to bring the best you possibly can. And so you research to death, you continue to qualify your things, you start pulling in research papers that scientists across the globe are publishing on psychology and human computer interaction design, documents that are the most boring thing you could ever read. They're awful because they're so sciencey, and it's like, can we use UX in your report, please? Because I'm struggling to follow all of this. But eventually you get used to it and you just start to
Okay.
really understand it. And so I learned it from that, and just from doing the work. Somebody gives you a chance, you've got to roll up your sleeves and go. And a lot of trial and error is done. You fail fast, you fail often, you learn really fast.
I definitely like that because I think that's part of it is you having that focus, and then you're
Mhm.
also, I think your life experience is, to me, very key here. Is that experience word, right? You're in user experience UX, but your life
Yeah.
experience taught you to,
Mhm.
and you're learning and adapting, like you said, you're absorbing, you're watching, absorbing it, and then experimenting with it. So I
Very
love
much.
that. I definitely love that. So how does one get into that field?
To answer your question, the biggest advice that I give to anybody is to have that open heart acceptance of
Okay.
anything that you don't expect.
Okay.
Because no, it's true, because that is when at the edge of your understanding is weird. As I tell my kids, somebody says your food looks weird. It's not what they're used to. So at the edge of what you're personally used to is learning. And if you can be experimentative, if you can continue to learn and to take in information and really hear people,
Mm-hmm.
really take the time to hear people, the rest of it is gravy. You
Okay.
can get books, you can go through tutorials and learn how to be an amazing graphic designer. You can work with somebody who already is and just absorb, like I did. I worked with some of the most talented graphic designers that I think I've ever seen. And no offense to anybody else. I just worked with a lot of really, really talented people. And you can pick those skills up. I did.
So so that's
And so yeah, that curiosity
the
is
curiosity.
what's
Yeah. Okay.
needed.
So what about somebody that are in, um, you know, can anybody becoming a UX person? Can a business analyst? Can a developer? Can a, say for example, my daughter is a high schooler. If they have their sight on something, right,
Mhm.
and maybe that is UX, how do they get from that point onward? So I love what you just said about, hey, be curious, be open, and things like that. What else do they need to do? Are they certification they have to do? Are there certain
Mm.
classes they have to be watching out for?
That's fair. That's a fair question. There is a lot of official education out there. So I mentioned that I picked everything up with
Okay.
books. That is an opportunity. That is an option. There are books for everything. And if you are really passionate about it, psychology is really important. My favorite resource for UX is Nielsen and Norman. So there's a website, it's n/n, and they
Okay.
have some of the best UX, open and accessible to anybody. Most government websites even have minimum requirements that you can look through, but there's so many classes out there. I highly recommend anything by Jared Spool. So
Okay.
I think that's UIE. Anything through the Interaction Design Foundation. There's the AIGA, I believe is what it is, the American Institute of Graphic Arts.
Okay.
And there's some great authors that have published under the AIGA umbrella as well. So if you do need to take it this route, but there's also there is a lot to be said about books that question the way the human mind works in the human psyche. And then from there, the psychology of design. There's a lot to be said for official education in the art space and understanding how color plays a factor depending on what culture you're in,
Okay.
and knowing and understanding that it's not a golden standard rule for every single person. It's
Okay.
very culturally dependent, and to
Yeah.
always be learning.
Okay. Yeah. See, that's the thing. There's just so much that in this last just couple of days, you mentioned all these references, right? The
Yeah.
only reference that I remember is I have two books that I read was like, a number of colors you can put on a page, and there's one that says, "Don't make me think." There's a
Yes,
book
that's a
that
good
called
one.
right. So that's the one that I love the most, right? But it's interesting to hear all these things. The last thing on my mind right now is what is change friction? I know we talk about it on the call,
Yes.
um, but what is that?
Change friction is that feeling that you get when you want to drag in your heels, because somebody is asking you to do something different than what you thought you were about to do. So that could be anything from telling your kids, hey, we're going to go get ice cream, but then something happens and you can't. And they're
Okay.
screaming in the back seat, but we were supposed to get ice cream. To and the emotional toll that takes on them, because you know that it doesn't end with them kicking and screaming in the back of the car. You might be feeling it for 2 days that you didn't get them ice cream. But in the professional space, you see it as lethargy.
Okay.
You see it as I've been doing this for X number of years, and you're asking me to do something different, but I don't understand why that would be more useful than what I'm doing right now. What's wrong with it? And so that resistance to change, that is also change friction in UI or in hardware design, like a vacuum cleaner or a door. Change friction shows up as, this is what I came to expect, and you changed it on me. The thing is not where I expected it to
Okay.
be. And so in UIs, that means there's a save button on the bottom right corner every single time in this interface.
Right.
And so every time you're in it, without thinking about it. You don't read
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
Stop reading.
Yeah.
You're just like, I need to do a thing. I need
Yeah.
to enter in my budgets. I need to log this call. You're not thinking about the interface. You shouldn't be.
Right.
You're going hitting the tab button over
Yep.
and over and over again so you can get through all of the data entry. And somebody moves the save button, it completely slows you down for
Yes.
2 or weeks or more, depending on how often you're using that interface. That's change friction.
So that's really cool story, because that reminds me of a work that I did for a long time ago when I first started my career. I was creating a software for a person that's on the call and trying to manage their trucks, and they're getting the calls, and she's just furiously entering the thing, and I have no idea what it was. I haven't seen that part of work, and my design was around using the mouse, right? And like you said, there's a change in the order of the tabbing creates chaos for her.
Absolutely.
It's not until when I actually sat down with her and watched what she does that's when I realized, yeah, mouse is not the way to go for her.
Yeah.
It has
Yeah.
to be just pure keyboard and key shortcut keys for her. But that's interesting how that what you just mentioned is to me, it almost feel like we have to be there to see how the user use it.
Mm, a
And I
lot of
think most of the time
times.
people don't get that, right?
It's true. It's part of it. It's not the full scope. There's gosh, what's the term for that? Contextual inquiry is when we specifically are going after to get information about a
Mm-hmm.
specific thing, but the opposite of that is what you're talking about, and that's my favorite kind of
Mm-hmm.
research because I can sometimes, by watching, have the simplest thing, the tiniest change, like changing something from a series of checkboxes to radio buttons,
Right.
can end up boosting the happiness and the
Right.
retention of
Right.
customers like nothing else. Just the change of that, or taking a string, so a line of text that
Yeah.
wraps and simplifying it down to 4 words. Oh my word, the cognitive load decreases so much, as in the amount of information that a user is trying to filter out so they can focus on their task at hand.
Right.
The more things they have to filter out, like basically mentally turn off, the number of things they have to turn off, the easier it is for them and their happiness boosts. It doesn't even have to look good. It can look like the oldest system, the biggest dinosaur, but if there's less on the screen,
Yeah.
they're a happier customer. They're a happier
Interesting.
end user.
Interesting.
And being
Awesome.
able to watch people do what they do is how you get to those conclusions.
Yeah, and that's the whole idea behind how do I not change the world, but change the world for that one person.
Mm-hmm.
That's that small joy that we bring for that one user. If we can increase that joy, right? The delight of using the product.
Mm-hmm.
And like you just mentioned, that's just amazing that we can do that. So to me,
Yeah.
that is the power of user experience.
Yes, it
Right.
is. That's why I do what I do.
That is so awesome.